most of which I hope are sort of humorous. But for me, and for those of you here, my takeaway from that video and all of the information about how intrinsic and deeply embedded social and mobile and digital technologies are in people's lives, it's this. It's that they are mandatory for businesses in 2014 going into 2015. We were having a conversation earlier actually about how businesses have started to realize that the things we're going to talk about today this is not advertising or promoting or marketing your business. This is operating your business. That being able to be found on the first page of Google results, having a website that works on a phone, is roughly equivalent to having someone show up at your business in the morning and unlock the door and turn on the lights. One example, the website on the left, which is what a lot of your business's websites look like, is not optimized for a phone. And by optimized for a phone, what you have to think about is a mobile phone. The phone isn't really the only thing that's mobile, right? It's the person using the phone is also mobile. They're probably using it like this while they're driving, whether we like to think about that or not. In almost every case, if they're on your website on a phone, it's because they're trying to call you, trying to figure out if you're open, get directions to where you are, or maybe see if you have a particular piece of inventory that they want. By making you pinch and grab, instead of have a simple button that says, call us or get a map, when we use our phones this way, this website is the effective equivalent, says Forrester, not me, of just randomly closing your store one day a week because you're driving customers away from you. When you think about how we live our lives today, and just maybe 3 or 4 years ago when we started having these conversations with businesses, we used to have to say, think about how your kids live their lives. But that's not the case anymore. The fastest growing demographic on Facebook has been 55-plus women for years now. You'll hear from Troy later about how his 80-year-old mother is on Twitter. The amount of time that we all spend in our email inboxes, on our mobile phones, is growing so exponentially that if you think about it, even through the context of businesses being here today, you've probably done some advertising of your business on television or on the radio, maybe in print, maybe on billboards. But even think about it in that context. A consumer who has seen your television commercials or heard your radio spots or seen your billboards or your print ads, even if they've seen them over and over and over again to the point where they remember your jingle and they think, yeah, I really want to interact with that business. I'm interested in using them for whatever it is that they do. There's something that stands in between that consumer who's heard your ads and the thing that you want them to do, and that thing is a computer. And more often it's a computer that looks like this. More and more often it's a Google search page or a social media recommendation from a friend or a family member, or it's an email with a special offer in it, or what we'll talk a lot about, a rating or a review on a site like Yelp that gives them confidence that your business is, in fact, a business that they want to interact with. Not being successfully found on a phone, and to some extent a laptop and a tablet, again, is roughly equivalent to shutting down your business one day a week, which is something you just would never do. Yet a lot of businesses, for any number of reasons, allow themselves to not be terribly successful in this space. And the answer to, in my view, of why that is because this stuff is hard. What you'll hear a fair bit about is that Troy and I know how to do these things primarily because they're the only things we've ever done. And aside from being a donut shop owner, they're the only things we know how to do. We don't know how to make custom-made furniture. We don't know how to do LASIK surgeries. We can't fix your HVAC system. We don't know the first thing about selling a car. We would be utterly useless without a computer of some form in our hands. But this one thing we know how to do. Starting with the most basic question here around digital success for your business. Your business wants to show up on the first page of Google search results for a relevant query about your business. Well, Google's algorithm, quote unquote, which is actually dozens of algorithms, is considered the most highly protected piece of intellectual property that has ever existed in the history of human business. The people who work on it don't know how it works. Nobody has full access to the entire code base. I used to say that it was more secure than the NSA. We now know that doesn't mean a whole lot anymore. But the idea that you, as a business owner, could possibly understand enough about how Google works to know what you have to do to get your business on the first page of Google search results is incredibly implausible, if not impossible. Yet we would expect you to know how to do that and how to get listed in all the online directories you need to be listed in, how to optimize your website for a phone, how to address Facebook for your business. It's just not possible. And it leaves a lot of businesses feeling like, I don't know where to start, it's hard, I've tried before, I've gotten it wrong, this isn't going to work for me, and I'm just not going to do it. Which essentially places you here, which is, on one hand, you have to do this. And on the other hand, you can't do this, at least not by yourselves. And so you should, at least I would argue, you should take a statement like that and think, all right, well, where do we go next? The mountain metaphor that I showed before, where we show these services against a backdrop of Mount Everest, came out of a thought process we had years ago in terms of how do we describe this to business owners and to folks like you. And this idea of a Sherpa started to take shape. And you've probably heard of a Sherpa. You probably think of it as a person who helps other people climb Everest. And that is what they do. But the reason that Sherpa are what they are, the reason they can do that is Sherpa are an ethnicity. They're an ethnic group of people who for centuries have been raised at above 10,000 feet in the Himalaya. They can actually go to the top of Everest and breathe normally without the aid of supplemental oxygen or oxygen canisters on their back. And if you think about that for a second, the top of Everest is more than 29,000 feet high. That's higher than the cruising altitude of the Airbus A320 that you'll be sitting in as you're flying into Kathmandu if you actually wanted to try and climb Everest. You know what happens to you, or at least you can probably guess, if you're sitting in an Airbus at 30,000 feet and it's depressurized. Not going to be so good for you. Yet these Sherpa, because their body processes hemoglobin differently than yours does, differently than mine does, means they get more oxygen out of their blood than you can, and they can climb the mountain on their own. Now, I've never been to the top of Everest. I don't think Troy has either.
Not yet.
But the metaphor that applies here is Troy and I were raised in the equivalent, the digital equivalent of Everest. I was raised in Silicon Valley before it was even called Silicon Valley. My mother was the first woman ever in the state of New York to get a master's degree in computer science. I was forced to do this stuff when I was 11 years old, when my dad brought me home a computer and said, you're going to write a program to teach your sister multiplication tables. As a result of that, although by luck and circumstance, we know how to do this. Again, it's the only thing we know how to do. But when you think about how you address a problem that's both mandatory and impossible, you need to think really, really hard about who you're going to have help you do that. Now, granted, no one's going to die in this space. But when you think about that Everest metaphor, the difference between why last spring 20 people died on Everest and why last week an overweight 57-year-old doctor from Houston just summited Everest 2 months after the season was supposed to have closed, the primary difference between success and failure in this space does have a lot of risk, existential risk for your business, even if it doesn't mean death. The primary difference is who do you pick for your Sherpa? And part of what we hope we'll come back to at the end of this presentation is to try to make you feel comfortable that there are people out there who know how to help you do this. You just have to choose wisely who they are. Now, Troy and I, this isn't just about us, and we're going to make it mostly about your business, but we want to have Kevin talk for a couple minutes so you understand that this is something that the folks here have been working on for a very long time and is a big part of their business as well.